the biggest marker for kids' development was how engaged their parents were in the play. So not the toys they had, not, how big their living room was, but rather their parents being engaged. And so there are a lot of studies out there showing this. And it really just was so grounding to me to show and do this podcast around how do you engage with your kids. And this is why it's so important. Welcome to the Active Play Everyday podcast powered by Next Playground. I'm your host, Dr. Emily, pediatrician, mom of three, and childhood wellness advocate. This show is about one simple goal: helping your family find a realistic path to 60 minutes of active play every day. No guilt, no pressure, just finding what works in real life. The information shared here is for education and inspiration. It's not medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for guidance specific to your family. All right, let's get moving. Today, we're talking to Brittni Winslow, a friend of mine, but also pediatric occupational therapist and really an expert in the developmental power of play. And Brittni is an amazing entrepreneur mom who owns 3 pediatric practices focusing on OT, PT, and speech therapy for children who need to work on their development. And so she really is acutely aware of the intersection between child development and play. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, but also in brainstorming with Brittni, we were talking and something just absolutely stopped me in my tracks, which is not all parents really feel super comfortable playing with their children. And as like a silly pediatrician, I feel like it just sort of comes naturally to me, and it didn't occur to me. And so I said, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So Brittni, let's start out with, first of all, welcome. And second of all, tell us about why we should even care about sort of that partnership between play and development and parents.
Yeah. This is such a fun conversation.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here. So first of all, the work that we do, whether it is OT, PT, or speech, play is the foundation. Like, we look at the way kids learn is through play. That is the primary thing that they are doing. And so being able to utilize that in the way that can help to unlock these skills for development or addressing behaviors in a different way or whatever that is, play is the foundation of that. And we use play as our vehicle for everything. So,
Yeah.
I would say if we get a critique from a parent, sometimes it might be like, it looks like you're just playing. Like, why are they just coming here to play? Right. And we're like, oh, great question. We need to really make sure that we understand like what this means and how we're utilizing play to address our goals. Because it should feel like play to the kids, but you're completely right. I mean, that like ability for parents to understand how to play, feeling comfortable to play with their kids is not natural for everyone. So, it's been something that it shocked me coming into being a pediatric occupational therapist, because I also love to play. I've always been around kids. I wanted to do this because I like to play, but it isn't natural for everyone. So
Yeah.
finding those ways to connect the parents and the kids, it's fun to figure out what's going to work best for each dynamic.
So Brittni, give us some examples of maybe this combination of development and play that are happening at the same time, maybe both within your practice and also for parents that don't have kids who need pediatric OT or PT, something that they may recognize from what's happening with their own kids at home or on the playground. Where they can start to think about this concept.
Yeah, for sure. So, in the clinic setting, we have a lot of tools for play. We've got endless amounts of games. We've got, our clinics have big sensory gyms where we have swings and crash pads and all of that. So access to things to play with, it's plentiful. But if we're looking about, so say a kid comes in and they're having some academic issues, maybe it's, holding the pencil or writing their name, but also we're having maybe some difficulty with things that we would categorize as behaviors. So they're having big reactions to things or having a hard time just kind of following directions or whatever that might be. I like starting out with kids in the gym. So let's do some big body movements. Let's figure out some ways to get your body moving, see how you respond to that movement. So often, just getting kids moving and seeing their affect change, and you can build rapport better in that way. So we get in the gym, we look at stringing together different movements together with the equipment, making an obstacle course, whatever that is. So, and it's very fun. We're going to play through that whole sequence, but then maybe we add some sort of element in where we're also working on their grasp. So they're working on hand strengthening as we're playing, or we're playing a game, but we're using some sort of like fun manipulative to kind of move things around to develop the grasp. And so instead of just targeting those same skills by coming into a room, sitting at a table, like just working on something, grasp related over and over again, like you can see already, like if you're painting this picture of how much more engaging it can be when we're really using play, and particularly really starting with those bigger body movements, I think is super, super successful. You're working on regulation and everything throughout that. And so if you start to I feel like that kind of opens the window a lot of times to, okay, well, how can we simulate this at home? So when you're also, right, like if you're working with your kid as a parent who has kids who also get therapy, it's a different dynamic. I've got the OT brain and I can work with my kids, but sometimes it's harder to that tension can kind of arise when you're trying to work their developmental related tasks at home when it's your kid. Play, I think, becomes even more important in those situations, to where you're connecting through play with trying to work on even just sequencing something. You can take daily activities. Maybe you're cooking dinner, but you're turning it into the fact that maybe you're making it a little restaurant and you need the kid to do this or that. So just find those opportunities to make something more fun, make it play-based, and you can integrate so much into your daily life. It doesn't have to be like we're going to carve out 30 minutes, an hour every day to work on this focused task.
Yeah, I 100% see that with my own 3 kids. I mean, as soon as I turn something into a game,
yes,
then all of a sudden putting away the laundry or dragging the laundry back upstairs or bringing, whatever it was, or helping with the dishes or helping make dinner, becomes this thing that they can really engage and connect with. As soon as you connect that element of play, and a lot of times it's about movement, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And getting them moving and up off the couch or whatever they're doing. And the other thing that came to mind as you were talking is, this idea of an obstacle course, as a parent, encouraging your kids, giving them the first few steps of something, right? Okay, why don't you pull all 3 cushions off the couch, and spread them out and sort of show them how to do that. And if you've got multiple kids in your household, sometimes they'll sort of follow each other. And sometimes as a parent, maybe you've got to demonstrate the first way, hopping between the lily pads, and then your kid will follow behind, or you can sort of coach them through and be playing with them that way.
Yeah, and I love the kind of getting them started and then using kind of those I wonder statements, like, I wonder what else we can use. I wonder what happens if we do this. So then you're implementing this whole other level of curiosity and helping them to kind of think and explore. It's fun to see how it starts to kind of snowball into everything can be something that's fun. Or I even like taking if I really need to get them up and moving around the house, something as easy as writing little clues on sticky notes, or just putting them throughout the house, and how fast can we go? So we're going upstairs, we're going downstairs, we're going in different places. So it doesn't have to be, I've got all this equipment to make this work. You can really do it in such a cheap, easy way.
Yeah, 100%. And so the I wonder statement, that is something all parents should take away. And that's a great reminder for me too, because it's such a great way to keep things going and let the kids sort of lead, but you're still engaged, right? And so sometimes I feel like I'm out of ideas, I came from work, I'm tired, but I can say I wonder in a way that hopefully will engage them and get them to take the next step, but keep things going. And so I imagine for parents where this, they don't have the next idea as easily as somebody who's a 5-year-old still in an adult body, that I wonder statement's awesome. We've talked about sort of that there are parents out there that just doesn't come quite as naturally playing with their children. That's totally normal and actually more common than those who are pediatricians or pediatric occupational therapists probably realize right off the bat. And, we may very well have a huge number of parents listening today that feel, wow, like I think I'm kind of in that category and I could use some tips. And so, where have you seen that in your clinic or out in the world? And how have you partnered with those parents? And what tips have you found really work for them? And what could the listeners do, starting today to start to have some active play with their kids at home where this just doesn't feel supernatural?
Yeah, I think it could be such a vulnerable topic for some people because I think
Mm.
when you're a parent and you have kids, like admitting that whether or not you don't really know how to play or you don't like playing, like, or doesn't feel comfortable, like I think those things, being able to have a good relationship, and that's what I just love partnering with parents and being able to get to that place from the beginning because so much of the struggle that some families have at home like is not going to come out in the first time you meet them, right? So when we start to learn that this isn't organic for some people, something I like to tell them is like, go back to when you were a kid. It takes a little bit of time to really go back and reflect on this, but what did I like playing with? What could I get lost in for hours as a kid playing with? How did I like to go? If I went outside to play, what did I go do? So trying to reconnect almost like with your own like inner child a little bit on what did that feel like? What kind of things did I like to do? Which might be drastically different than how your kid plays, right? But then
Hmm.
starting to play around and experiment a little bit. I think so much of what we do as parents is experimenting, right? Like we're going to try this, we're going to see how they respond, and it's not totally different from what we do in therapy and trying to see what's going to work. And so just try that. Find something that you can really reconnect with and try that as a way to engage, or even just try to reconnect to that feeling and think about ways to start to find connection with your kid through some of those things. And it doesn't have to be this like big elaborate Miss Rachel kind of like play situation, right? It can just even be finding small times to sit and connect and being finding that way to be present in that, because I think oftentimes when we have so much mental load and there's so much going on, I think even finding the time as parents to sit down and play seems kind of like trite, or, how do I even, I've got so much to do, I can't sit down and play, right? So if we do sit down and play, we're really distracted, or maybe our phone is still out. So even just like 5 minutes of let's put the phone away, let's be present, let's, make sure we're regulated ourselves is a big part of it. If you're trying to go in and play with your kid, you don't want to come into the situation like tense and like I've got 100 things to do because they're going to pick
Yeah.
up on that energy. So it's kind of this multifaceted like what can you reconnect with as a kid? How can I make sure I'm in the right space to do this and intentionally connect? And then just really start small. It doesn't have to be something grand.
I'm going to make an observation and then also ask you a question about sort of a challenge I've had, which is when I get up and especially when I engage in active play with my kids and try to get them up and moving, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is really what they need most after,
Yeah.
a day sitting at school and only a 15-minute recess. And my kids are the kind of kids that just really need a ton of activity to stay regulated. And I find when I get up and start to play, things start to escalate. Part of it is that I have three kids and they all sort of feed off of each other. But also I feel like I need help with as they start to really amp up and
Mm.
get active. It's almost like we become dysregulated together
Yep.
and we need, so first of all, how should I approach that and
Yep.
making sure it doesn't get out of hand? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you're looking at this through, dysregulation and like the sensory systems, I would always go to, yeah, rough and tumble kind of play, like moving around, moving your body in a lot of different places can be more alerting. Depending on everyone's own kind of sensory preferences, that can also be really regulating for some kids, but it does get to this place where like, oh, we're regulated, but now we don't really know how to like modulate that back down.
Hmm.
So, anything that we can get to that is really giving good it's accessing your proprioceptive system. So that's just anytime that your muscles or joints are being like stretched or contracted is going to be really regulating, and pairing that with breathing too is really regulating. So if you're finding yourself in this kind of like, oh, we're all kind of getting dysregulated, how can we think about, okay, so we're going to do something that's like maybe slower, like big jumps, pairing some breathing with it, like whole body, like input to your muscles and joints, but in a way that is like maybe slowing things down, or even just taking the like bigger movements out of it. Like movement that's going to be back and forth is going to be, and more rhythmic is going to be more regulating than like more stop and start
Oh,
and
yeah.
like, rotary kind of movement and all of that. So I think just thinking about the element of the type of input you're getting as you're playing can really help to kind of bring everyone back down and ground.
Yeah, and I think building that in, I mean, one of the I'm brainstorming right now. I think like it's like Amazon Alexa actually has like a music little game that you can play that the music goes on and then it stops. And I'm sure
Okay.
there's lots of resources that we could probably put in the show notes about
Yeah.
that where, you turn it on and, maybe you're having a dance party with your kids, but it's like
Hmm.
freeze dance, right?
Yep.
Or
Right.
maybe there's a signal and you strike a pose and
Yep.
everybody, we trade whose turn it is that we copy their pose. And
Right.
to your point, working in that sort of behavioral regulation where even
Hmm.
I can also feel regulated, like,
Yeah.
okay, like things are up
Right.
here and I want to bring them and I need
Yeah.
to like not like feel jangled with this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's a great tip for me. Making sure that whatever we're doing has one of those things built in, or, if it's an obstacle course, there's like, we build this magic mushroom where,
Hmm.
you're going through it and then everybody's pausing
Yep.
for 5 seconds on this mushroom and then they're moving on to the more
Yeah.
active parts.
And making
Yeah.
sure when they are pausing that you're breathing, because that's another thing that
Yes.
happens
Yeah.
when we're moving a lot. Is a lot of times what I'll observe with kids is that they kind of like their breathing gets more shallow, or they're holding their breath during certain
Mm.
positions. And so even if you are doing something, you're stopping, making sure they're not holding their breath when they're doing that. How can you make sure that we're taking big regulating breaths as we're also doing that is really powerful.
Yeah, I love that. And so working, if your kids tend to sort of start to amp up a lot with
Hmm.
this type of active play, working in these moments of regulation, which we mean
Yep.
sort of that slow breathing, striking a pose together, doing a freeze dance and taking a couple
Yep.
of slow breaths, and then sort of entering back in.
Yep.
And then also knowing when to stop. I mean, sometimes you can sort of sense that moment where like, okay, like
Yeah.
we've done this game, it was fun. And now they're starting to sort of fall apart or amp up more quickly.
Hmm.
Like maybe let's move on to
Yep.
something that's more calm or say,
Yep.
I wonder what else we could
Yeah.
play, to use
Yeah.
your prompt.
And
Yeah.
I think that's so common, for what I see with kids interacting with parents at the end of the day.
Mm,
Sometimes it is like there's a parent that's coming home later in the day and wants to connect with their kids more physically, and there ends up being more kind of that rough and tumble play, but then it gets really, they do get amped up, right? So,
yeah.
there's so much, so many times I hear about this scenario with like one of the parents has been trying to really like get kids settled down, and then there's the parent that comes and amps everyone up. And how can we just think about the types of movements that we're doing, and just like the breathing, the pausing, the those elements of it, you can still play and have that connection in the way that feels natural to you with your child, but make it in a way that's going to, you can either bring them back down if they do get dysregulated, or you can just try to keep it in a way that is uh, focusing on more of that grounding kind of work instead of more of the like heavy amped up kind of activities.
I love that. And then, a tip to parents too is like thinking about when you want to do that sort of active play every day and working that in, right? Is it
Mm-hmm.
before dinner so that, the kids can get their wiggles out and get some energy out and then we're all going to sit together and eat dinner? I mean, probably not right before your bedroom routine. You don't want to sort
Yeah.
of have this amped up
Right.
activity. And so sort of being purposeful and maybe creating a routine, right? You get
Yep.
home from work or they get home from school, whatever it might be, and you take a certain amount of time to sort of put everything away. And then, okay, now we're going to all play together for 20 minutes and then we're going to have reading time or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Creating a routine that's good for your family. And that'll help you get into this habit of
Yeah.
partnering and playing together.
So I want to build on something you just said there, because there is so much power in how we do find the times for active play in a way that supports the needs of the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And this reminds me of oftentimes in classrooms what I'll see. I mean, you see this in classrooms as an example, you also see this at like meal times where kids are up running around, they can't stay seated, and the tendency is like, I need you to sit down, I need you to sit down.
Mhm.
We got to like bring our bodies down, let's sit down. And there might even be like, if they're trying to incorporate a sensory strategy, maybe it's like, we're going to put a weighted lap blanket on. And there's, instead of like, this is like my biggest message out there when I'm in the world is like, if these kids are not, if they're seeking a lot of movement and they're not able to get to that, so our bodies have this, these different thresholds for when we've had enough movement or enough activity. And once we hit that peak that's unique to us, we have this neurochemical release that our body knows we have what we need, and we can stay in this regulation zone for a little bit of time. So it's actually so much more beneficial if a kid is kind of bouncing off the walls and having a hard time sitting down to lean into that, find ways to be active in a way that's regulating for that kid to get them to this place before they have to sit down and do something versus just
Ah,
asking them to kind of suppress that need to move around. So yeah, pairing that before dinner time or before they go into school or whatever it is that works for the family's routine is so important.
yeah, that is a huge point. And honestly, something I think that we could be doing even better in our family is getting in that active play
Mhm.
before dinner even more.
Yeah.
So that, and be very purposeful about, okay, now is a time where we're going to be calm and
Mm-hmm.
sit. And, the same thing, giving opportunities to wiggle a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
even in the context of needing to be
Yep.
calm is okay. And there are
Yep.
various methods for that, which we can get into in a different podcast. I'm sure this can be the first of many. There's also this category of children, maybe not the child themselves, but certain moments in a child's life or things that draw them away from active play. And so what I'm getting at here is there are some kids that seem actually to be resistant to getting up
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to play with their parents in this way that we know is developmentally so good. And so whether they're being distracted by a screen or, they just, there's some hesitation. Maybe this is not something the parent and child have done frequently before. How should parents approach that?
Yeah, so I see this so much more now than I used to in treatment. I think there's multiple dynamics for why. You mentioned like, yes, screens can really do a lot and captivate a lot of our attention, and
Mm-hmm.
most of the time that's like bringing us into a sedentary position. Sometimes kids don't want to engage in active play because they have not been successful in it, or they don't really know how to coordinate their body in different ways. So that's just not something they're going to gravitate towards. Kids start to lose confidence and they start to realize that they are not good at something really early on.
Mm.
And so then they start to find things that they are, more successful with and stick with those. So, in those moments, it is this kind of challenge to figure out, they don't like it, but we know they need it. And I find one of the things I always like to go for is how can we just start getting our bodies moving? So a kid I was working with recently was came into the clinic very disengaged, did not want to be there, probably like 8 or 9 years old, and has a lot of activities that are very sedentary, and wouldn't even really look at me, and just was very clear they were not in this. And we started having some conversation. I found some interests they liked, and we kind of started to kind of pull a couple of things out and decided to go into the gym. And first, just we both got on swings.
Mm.
And as soon as this girl got on the swing and started moving, I mean, she went from like completely looking down to like body opened up, engaging
Mm.
with me. It was such a beautiful moment. And the parent was there for that, which made it even better to see like, did you see that transformation? Right?
Yeah.
This girl who's like, not wanting to engage with friends, not wanting to get out there and move, like totally her whole demeanor changed, how she was talking to me about her day and her struggles, like all completely transformed. And so I think just again, starting small, if we can start just moving together, literally all we were doing is we were both kind of swinging in two different places.
Mm.
And the attention wasn't on her. I wasn't forcing her to do anything, but we were just experimenting with kind of what does this feel like? And then from there, it really started to kind of catapult into so many different things. And so, um, And that can be based in a sensory principle too. I mean, there are some kids who really need more movement in order to feel regulated and feel just right, but their body's not giving them that signal to do that.
Hmm.
So you've got the kids who do seek it out and they're bouncing off the walls and they need more of that input. But there are also kids who need that, but they're not getting that cue to do it. But it's so impactful for them. So just starting with the movement, and there's a lot of research out there too that just supports the once we start moving, you're tapping into what's your vestibular system at that point. That has a huge connection to affect, to level of arousal, and also to language. And so if I need to get even my kids sometimes, like they're not opening up to me about or connecting with me about kind of what's been going on in their day. I know if I can just find a way to get us both kind of moving, that's going to start to come naturally. So being able to start there and then just see where it goes.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And, one example in my family is I find, if we start drawing or coloring together, suddenly
Yeah.
we're talking in a way that we weren't before,
Hmm.
from the comment, that you just made about sort of being a bit shut down and trying to figure out how to open up those parts of the brain.
Yep.
And same thing, my kids are those kind of kids that are moving, it feels like sometimes as a parent too much, but I
Right.
absolutely know those kids who don't sort of take that first step towards movement. And so in the example you gave of this child who, once she started swinging,
Hmm.
all of a sudden these other parts of her brain started to open up and be more available to her. Like, how would a parent then approach those things at home? They may not have a
Hmm.
swing, for example, in their
Hmm.
home. And what would be your idea for that parent about how to kind of have that same thing happen that
Yeah.
happened in your gym, but at home?
Yeah. I mean, in this situation, it was so impactful for this kid. I went to the mom and said, "Do you have a swing at home? Like, are there
Mm,
ways we can make this work?" But if you're thinking about that kind of movement, it could even be, do you have something that rocks back and forth? Do you have kind of a like a bouncy ball you can sit on and kind of move your body?
yeah.
Sometimes maybe it's even just going for a walk, and just kind of starting to get the body moving, or just finding some way to using what you have. I mean, the input you're trying to get is more of that kind of rhythmic back and forth kind of movement. So again, it comes down to experimenting. What do you have? How can we simulate that? You can get some of that too just through like animal walks and yoga, but I find sometimes those things are a little bit harder to get a kid to engage in
Yeah.
versus something that you can just get on and it just kind of moves,
Yeah.
or
And
just
Brittany,
getting the body
maybe
started.
100%. And maybe you and I can come up with a list because I know some of
Yeah,
these things because I've sought them out for my own children and
yeah,
as a pediatrician. And I know you've got a huge list of these. So, and then many of them are not expensive. And
no,
regardless of the size of your living room or home, you can probably fit one of these things.
right.
And so we can put some in the show notes about some of these things if you feel like you've got a kid like that where they just need a way to kind of get moving, and then that will help them
Hmm.
jump on to some of these other ideas we've given throughout the show. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brittany, thank you so much. And you know that at the end of every Active Play Everyday podcast, we write a prescription for active play every day. And in this case, for parents partnering and playing with their kids. So for fun, if you were to help me write that prescription, what would it say?
Yeah, I love this. And I think mine would probably be just finding one way every day to use active play to support a change in your mood or your energy levels. I think oftentimes those are two things that, if we're in a bad mood or we're really low energy, we're more inclined to want to be more sedentary, or avoid getting and like jumping into play with the kids. But active play can actually be something that really transforms both of those. So just one opportunity a day, or maybe, three a week, whatever feels attainable to you, but find a way when you get those moments that you're really low energy or you feel like your mood needs to change, try active play as a way and just explore how that changes for you.
I love it. Taking those moments of being sedentary and saying, how can I shift this? Because even if it lasts for 2 minutes, that's better than nothing. And as you know, oftentimes once you take that first step, it sort of
Yep.
multiplies. And that's what we're aiming for here. I love it. If you really enjoyed sort of hearing about active play and how PT, so physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all of this is really woven into that. And maybe you have a child who's already in therapy, a child who you think may benefit from these types of therapies, or you just want to learn more about this expertise and how you can help your child develop as a parent. Brittni has a website, The Therapeutic Edge. It's in the show notes, and there are a ton of resources there that everyone might find very beneficial, whether you're an occupational therapist listening in, a teacher, a parent. Really, it's for everyone. And so if you found this episode interesting, you may want to check that out for more information.
Yeah, Emily, thanks so much for mentioning that. We are really trying to build more resources that can be used, we directly for clinicians, but also, like you said, for parents, for teachers, for community groups, for anyone who really wants to get better educated on this area. We have courses. We also have free resources and downloadables that you can take away and use right away. And I also do a lot of trainings and workshops for different groups across the country. So would love to be connected with anyone who wants to learn more.
For more tips, resources, and show notes, visit activeplayeveryday.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please help us out by rating and reviewing the show from wherever you're listening. It really helps other families find us. Until next time, consider this your active play prescription, because play isn't extra, it's essential.